It was late afternoon when the storm finally hit. The sky had been brewing all day, a deep shade of gray that swallowed up the sun. I'd been walking for hours along the Continental Divide Trail near the Idaho/Montana border. The wind picked up, slicing through the trees with a ferocity that made the forest feel alive, but not in a welcoming way. The air was thick with moisture, and the rain was relentless, coming down in sheets, the kind that soaks you to the bone in minutes. I could feel the storm building, the way the trees shook in the gusts, their branches swaying violently as the wind howled through the forest. There was something unnerving about it. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I told myself it was just the normal danger of hiking in the backcountry, nothing more. The trail wound ahead through dense forest, the path narrow and muddy. My boots slipped on the slick trail, my pack weighing heavily on my shoulders, pulling me down with every step. I was drenched, and the cold was beginning to settle deep into my bones. I pulled my hood tighter, trying to shield myself from the biting wind, but it was useless. The storm had me in its grip, and then it happened. The wind had reached a new level of intensity, a constant roar that drowned out everything else. I'd gotten so used to the howling wind and the sound of rain that it took me a few seconds to hear it, the noise that broke through the storm. It was a loud crack, a sharp, almost sickening sound that cut through the air. My eyes darted upward instinctively, but I wasn't sure what I was seeing. It took a full second for my brain to process it. A massive pine tree ahead of me was tilting. At first, I thought maybe it was just the wind, bending the trunk in a way that trees sometimes do. But then the crown of the tree shifted. No, it was falling towards me. I froze, unable to move for a split second as I watched it happen. The tree creaked, a low groaning sound, and then the entire top began to fall. Time seemed to slow down. The world felt like it was moving in molasses. I couldn't understand what I was seeing at first. The way the crown of the tree twisted and shifted in the wind, moving in a way that just didn't make sense. It wasn't falling straight down as you'd expect. Instead, it was falling down the trail, directly in front of me, the massive trunk and its twisted branches slicing through the air. I could hear it, too, the terrifying sound of it crashing toward me, each second feeling longer than the last. It only took me a moment to process, but in that moment, the world around me seemed to shift. I remembered a scene from Prometheus, where the characters are running from that massive wheelie thing. They were running away from it, but never really veering off its path. They didn't seem to grasp that they needed to move sideways, not forward. Clicked in my mind. I was standing directly in its path, and if I didn't move now, I'd be crushed. I couldn't just keep going forward. I had to move, and I had to move fast. Without thinking, I veered to the side, off the trail. My legs were already moving before I fully realized what I was doing. My heart was pounding in my chest as I sprinted off the trail, feet slipping in the mud. I could hear the branches scraping, the sound of the trees fall intensifying, louder than the wind, louder than the rain. The ground beneath me trembled, as if the earth itself was shuddering from the impact. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, ducking under low-hanging branches, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I could feel the rain hammering down on me, cold and harsh, but nothing mattered except getting clear. There was no time to think, no time to question if I was making the right choice. I just had to keep moving, keep away from the path of destruction behind me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I skidded to a stop in a small clearing. I turned around just as the tree crashed to the ground behind me, a massive crack echoing through the forest. The whole thing landed lengthwise down the trail, blocking it entirely. The broken trunk and branches sprawled across the path, an enormous, twisted mess of wood that must have been at least 60 feet long. It was like a giant had dropped a tree on the trail, just to remind me that nature wasn't something you could control or predict. It could take you out in an instant without warning. I stood there, frozen, heart pounding, the rain still beating down around me. My mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. I just dodged death, and I wasn't sure I even fully understood how close I had come to being crushed by that tree. I could still hear the echo of the crack, the sound of the earth shaking, the terrifying force of it all. After a few moments, I managed to pull myself together. My legs were shaky, my body trembling from the adrenaline rush. I knew I had to keep moving. I couldn't just stand there, lost in the shock of it. There was no way to know if the storm would bring down more trees. I needed to find shelter, or at least get to higher ground, somewhere away from the danger. But as I turned to leave the clearing, another thought crossed my mind. My gut twisted in a way that had nothing to do with the tree. It was a feeling I'd learned to trust over the years of hiking, a feeling that something just wasn't right. Something else was out there, something I couldn't see. I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. The wind seemed to carry whispers, soft, distant sounds that made my skin crawl. I turned, looking over my shoulder, but all I could see were the rain-soaked trees swaying in the wind. I told myself it was just the storm playing tricks on me, but the feeling lingered. I forced myself to focus. The trail was blocked, and there was no way around the fallen tree. I'd have to backtrack. My gut told me that wasn't a good idea, but I didn't have much choice. I'd already passed a few small campsites back the way I came, and the thought of being stuck out here in the middle of the storm with nowhere to go made me uneasy. I knew I couldn't stay out here much longer. The wind was picking up and the rain was relentless, but there were risks in staying exposed to the elements for too long. As I made my way back, I tried to push the strange feeling from my mind, but it didn't go away. Every so often, I would hear something, branches moving, a soft rustling sound. My eyes darted around nervously, scanning the woods around me, but I didn't see anything. Then I heard something else, a noise that made my blood run cold, the unmistakable sound of something heavy walking through the underbrush behind me. My heart skipped a beat, and my body froze. I spun around, but all I saw were the trees, swaying in the wind. The rain had grown heavier, and the sound of the storm was deafening, but I couldn't ignore the sensation of being stalked. My skin prickled, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I wasn't alone. I pushed the panic down. I had to think. I had to be rational. I couldn't afford to be consumed by fear out here. Whatever it was, whether it was just my mind playing tricks on me or something else, I had to keep moving. I didn't have the luxury of standing still. I made my way back to the campsites I'd passed earlier, trying to keep my pace steady. The trail was slick, the mud making every step treacherous, but I couldn't afford to slip. The noise behind me seemed to grow fainter, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. Eventually, I reached the first campsite. It was empty, the tent poles bent and the tarp flapping wildly in the wind. I paused for a moment, considering my options. I could stop here, set up camp for the night, and wait out the storm. But I had a nagging feeling that I should keep moving, that staying put wasn't safe. It wasn't just the tree. There was something else out here, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I decided to keep moving. I set my sights on the next campsite, about a mile further down the trail. I'd find shelter there and figure out my next move. As I walked, the rain started to ease up, and the wind slowed. It didn't feel like a victory, though. It felt like the storm was just taking a brief pause, like the world was holding its breath. When I finally reached the next campsite, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I wasn't sure if it was the storm that had made me uneasy or something else entirely, but I was glad to have found shelter. I set up my tent quickly, the last bit of adrenaline still coursing through me, my hands shaking as I worked. The night passed uneventfully. No more strange noises, no more feeling of being watched. Just the steady rhythm of the rain and the occasional gust of wind rattling the trees outside. But the next morning, when I packed up my gear and set off again, I noticed something. The tree I had nearly been crushed by was gone. No sign of it. Just the broken pieces scattered across the trail, the stump cleanly sheared off, like it had been moved by something or someone. I didn't stop to think about it. There were things out there in the wilds of the trail you didn't question too much. You just kept walking. The morning started earlier than usual. I was 3 days into a solo backpacking trip, deep in the backcountry of the Cascades. I'd pushed further than I originally planned the day before, looking to make up time after a late start the first morning. The terrain had been slow. Steep ridges, uneven trail, patches of late snow still lingering in the shade. But the air had that crisp edge I liked, and the solitude was exactly what I needed. I'd camped in a small clearing tucked beneath a stand of old firs, just big enough to pitch my tent and boil water. No fire, just a warm meal, some water, and sleep. By the time I'd zipped up my bag the night before, I had the sense I hadn't seen another person all day. I don't always love that feeling. There's a fine line between peace and the kind of quiet that makes you realize how far out you really are. I slept light. Every snap of a twig or gust through the trees seemed sharper than it should have been. I woke before the sun, not by alarm, but that kind of half-sleep that comes when your body knows you've got a long hike ahead. I wasn't really rested, but I was alert. I boiled water for coffee, shoved the last of a crushed granola bar into my mouth, packed up fast, and started walking before the light changed. My headlamp cut a cone through the dark, bouncing gently as I moved. The sky hadn't started turning yet, still a dull, moonless black. Just stars and the sound of my boots crunching dry dirt and scattered gravel. I wasn't thinking about much, just hiking, breathing, watching the trail. I try not to let my mind wander too far when I'm hiking alone in the dark. You get lost in your head too deep and it's easy to miss a switchback or step wrong. So I just focus on the rhythm. Right foot, left foot, step over that root, adjust the strap, breathe. Then I saw it. The eyes. Two pale, green-white reflections, low to the ground, staring straight at me from maybe 20 yards up the trail. The beam of my headlamp hit them just right. Without it, I never would have noticed. They weren't moving, not blinking, just staring. And they were at just the right height that I knew it wasn't a deer or elk. I stopped walking, stood dead still. My hand instinctively went to my hip where I kept my bear spray clipped to the waist belt. The animal didn't move. The eyes stayed fixed on me, like it was trying to decide what I was, friend, threat, or prey. I shifted my weight slow, deliberately, and the light from my headlamp stayed locked on those 2 points. I could just make out the outline of the body behind the eyes, low, smooth, feline. Long tail curled near the ground, ears slightly back. It was a mountain lion, no doubt about it. It didn't growl or posture. It didn't creep closer or dart off into the woods. It just stayed there, calm, still. I felt the adrenaline hit like a wall, heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't scared in the classic sense. Not like something was about to jump out of the woods or grab me, but it was something deeper than that. A kind of hollow understanding that if this animal decided to move, I couldn't do a damn thing about it. Out here, I was slow. I was soft. I was just another animal on the trail, and I was alone. That part hit hardest. Not just the presence of the mountain lion, but the realization that if something went sideways, no one was coming. There was no cell signal, no nearby camps, no ranger station within hours. Just me and this animal staring each other down in the dark. I stood there for what felt like 5 minutes, but was probably closer to 30 seconds. Then it blinked, just once, and turned its head slowly, as if it was already bored with me. It gave a long, deliberate step off the trail and into the brush. Another step. Then it disappeared behind a thick clump of young pine. I didn't move right away. My hands stayed tight on the bear spray. I waited, listening, trying to catch the sound of it moving through the forest. But there was nothing. Just silence again. No wind. No bird calls yet. The sky still hadn't started to shift. I kept walking, slowly at first, scanning both sides of the trail, shining my headlamp into the trees. The adrenaline was still there, but I had control of it again. Felt like my body had taken a hit of cold water. I was awake now, fully. Part of me wanted to stop, wait for dawn, but I didn't. I kept going. My mind was clear now, too. That moment, staring down that big cat, had burned off every ounce of fatigue I'd been carrying. The trail climbed for another hour, rising out of the thick timber and into more open, rocky country. By the time the sun finally cracked the ridge behind me, I was a few miles from where it happened. I found a flat rock ledge that caught the light and sat down, dropped my pack, drank some water, and just breathed. From up there, I could see for miles. The valley below still held the morning mist, the tops of trees poking through like islands. That same quiet surrounded me, but it felt different now, less heavy. I thought about the mountain lion. Probably crossed that trail every day. Might have even passed my tent in the night without me knowing. It hadn't stalked me, hadn't made a sound, just watched. Not with malice or curiosity, just presence. There's a strange kind of comfort in that. Being reminded you're not the only one out there. Not really. It wasn't fear that stuck with me from that morning. It was that deep, unshakable feeling of being small. Not weak exactly, but insignificant in a place that didn't really care who I was or why I was there. That feeling carried with me the rest of the trip. Every step after that felt a little more honest. I stopped pretending I was in control of everything. Let the place be what it was. Watched the shadows move across the rocks in the afternoons. Listened harder to the rustle of wind in the trees. I didn't see the mountain lion again, but I knew it had been there. Knew it was probably still out there, living its life just a few canyons away. By the time I made it back to the trailhead 3 days later, I felt like I'd walked out of a different world. Nothing strange or supernatural had happened. No ghost stories or lost hikers or sudden injuries. Just one of those rare, real moments where nature pulls back the curtain for a second and lets you feel it. Raw, quiet, wild, and that was enough. It's funny now, thinking back. I didn't tell anyone about the lion when I got home. Not right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure how to explain it. People expect drama. Some charge, some chase, a narrow escape. But it wasn't like that. It was simple. Me and it, in the dark. Nothing happened. And somehow that meant everything. Looking back, that might have been the moment that changed how I see solo hiking. It's not the distance or the views or even the solitude that sticks with you. It's those brief, unshakable seconds when you remember exactly where you are and how alone you really can be. Not lonely, just alone. And how okay that can be. That mountain lion gave me that. Not by doing anything, just by being there, just by existing, quiet and wild. This past summer, we visited Montana for the first time. It was July, right in the middle of the season when the days are long and the skies stretch out wide and blue. We had flown in early in the afternoon, and the moment we stepped off the plane, we were hit with that fresh, open air that you only get in places like Montana. You could smell pine and sun-baked dirt in the air, and the mountains stood out sharp in the distance. It didn't matter that we'd just been on a plane for hours, we felt wired with energy. My girlfriend, my sister, and I looked at each other like we already knew what the plan was without saying it. Let's go hiking, right now. It was about 1 p.m. when we left the rental car at the trailhead. The sun was out full force, high in the sky, and it didn't even cross our minds to check the forecast. Not once. We grew up on the East Coast, where the summer weather has its own rules, but Montana felt different. Felt steady, solid. You don't think about storms when everything around you is shining. We grabbed our day packs, water bottles, some trail mix, a few snacks, no rain gear, and hit the trail without a second thought. The trailhead was well marked and welcoming. The first part of the trail passed through some wide meadows where we could still see the parking lot and the car behind us, and the grass came up to our knees in places. Wildflowers were in bloom, bright purples and yellows and whites, and bees hummed around us. There were mountains on the horizon, big ones with jagged peaks still holding onto some snow despite the heat. The air was warm but dry, and for a while it felt like the perfect hike. We passed a few people coming the other way, some families with kids, a pair of older women with hiking poles, a young guy with a camera slung around his neck. Everyone looked calm, relaxed, like they'd had a good walk and were ready for a cold drink. We nodded hello as we passed, but we didn't really stop. We were too excited. About 2 miles in, the trail dipped into the woods. The trees here were mostly lodgepole pines, tall and thin, reaching straight up to the sky. The sun filtered through in broken patches, lighting up the forest floor in soft gold. You could hear birds calling now and then and the occasional rustle of something small in the underbrush. Otherwise, it was quiet. Took a while before we noticed the light changing. It didn't happen all at once. There were just fewer patches of sunlight, and the air didn't feel as warm on our arms anymore. I looked up and saw that some clouds had started to gather overhead. High ones at first, just a light gray smear across the sky. We didn't think much of it. We figured if it started to drizzle, we'd just turn around. Nothing we hadn't done before. Another 20 minutes went by, and the trail wound deeper into the woods. It got a little cooler, and the clouds started to thicken. The sun was gone now, and everything took on this muted color, like the contrast had been turned down. I remember feeling a weird stillness in the air, like something was waiting, but it was just a feeling, and I kept moving. Then, somewhere ahead of us and to the right, we heard this deep, loud boom. It echoed in the forest. At first, I thought maybe it was thunder, far off in the distance. That made sense. Thunderstorms roll in sometimes without warning, especially in the mountains. I mentioned it out loud, but we kept walking. It didn't seem close. A couple minutes later, we heard another boom. This one sounded closer, sharper, and then another came just a few seconds after. I started to feel it in my chest, that low rumble like when a big truck passes nearby. Except there was no road out here. We weren't near anything man-made. I stopped and looked around, trying to get a better sense of what it was. Then came the wind. It didn't ease in slowly. It came all at once. This hard, fast blast that sent pine needles flying straight at our faces. Dirt kicked up from the trail, stinging our eyes, and the trees started to sway in ways that didn't look right. These weren't gentle breezes. This wind was strong, maybe 40 miles an hour or more, just tearing through the woods like it was trying to push everything over. Came in waves, calm for a second, then another hard gust, then another. That's when I started to feel it, real fear, the kind that grabs you by the gut and doesn't let go. The booms weren't thunder. Not really. They were trees falling. First, we didn't see them. You hear a crash, a snap of wood, a deep thud, and you try to tell yourself it's just something far away. But then I looked through the trees and saw one. A full-sized pine tree, maybe 40 feet tall, dropping like a matchstick. Just like that, roots up, dirt flying, the whole trunk crashing down into the undergrowth. Then another one, and another. I turned around and yelled for my girlfriend and my sister. No time for talking, just time to run. We started sprinting back the way we came. The trail wasn't smooth. It twisted and turned and dipped in places, and we were dodging rocks and low branches as fast as we could. The wind kept surging, and every time it did, more trees creaked and cracked around us. Some of them didn't fall right away. They leaned first, groaning like the forest itself was in pain. Others snapped at the trunk like they'd been cut with a giant saw. I looked back once and saw my sister maybe 10 feet behind me. She had her head down, arms pumping, hair blowing straight back. A few steps after she passed a tree on the left side of the trail, it fell right behind her, smashing into the exact spot she'd just been. It missed her by maybe a second. I screamed, but I couldn't even hear my own voice over the wind and the crashing. The trail started to climb a little as we got closer to the meadow again. My legs were burning, and my lungs felt tight, but I didn't dare stop. I kept thinking that at any second, a tree could fall right on top of us. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was survival, pure instinct. We finally broke out of the woods and into the open meadow, and that's when the wind hit us full force again, unobstructed. It felt like it could knock us over, like it was trying to peel us right off the trail. Dust swirled in the air, and branches flew past us. I could barely see the parking lot ahead through the haze, but I knew we were almost there. The car was right where we left it, and somehow it looked surreal, like it didn't belong in the chaos. We piled in as fast as we could, slammed the doors, and just sat there, breathing hard. No one said anything for a minute or two. We didn't need to. The storm moved fast. After another 20 minutes, the wind started to die down, and the skies cleared up almost like nothing had happened. By the time we drove out of there, it was bright and sunny again. The trailhead looked quiet, peaceful, but the forest was changed. We could see down trees even from the road, their trunks splintered, their roots sticking up like broken hands. That night, Back at the motel, we were too wired to sleep. I kept playing it over and over in my head. Those trees falling, the wind howling, my sister nearly getting crushed. We all agreed it was one of the scariest things we'd ever experienced. I started checking the weather nonstop after that. I couldn't stop thinking about how fast it all happened, how close we were to something that could have ended completely differently. The next day, we went back. Maybe that sounds crazy, but we had to. We needed to see the trail again, walk the full loop. This time we checked the forecast, brought proper gear, made sure everything was as safe as it could be. The forest looked like a battlefield. We counted 25 fallen trees across the trail, just on that loop. Some were splintered right in the middle, others pulled out by the roots. Branches were scattered everywhere, and in some places the trail was almost blocked completely. We had to climb over or under some of them. The ground looked torn in places, like something massive had dragged itself through. But the air was calm, the sky was clear, birds were out again, hopping around on branches and calling to each other. It was the same trail, but it wasn't. Something about seeing all that damage after surviving it made it feel like we were walking through a memory or a warning. The woods had changed, and so had we. We finished the trail that day, slow and careful, taking in every detail. We didn't say much. There was nothing to prove, no reason to rush. We just walked, aware now of how fast things could shift, how fragile everything really is, even a forest full of towering pines. Since then, I've thought about that hike a lot, about how we went in full of energy and excitement, not realizing how close we'd come to something deadly. There weren't any ghosts or monsters or anything like that, just wind and trees and the raw force of nature. That was enough. We learned something that day, not just about weather or hiking or being prepared. We learned how fast things can go from calm to chaos, and how lucky we were to come out of it untouched. A few seconds difference, a few steps slower, and the story might have ended another way. But it didn't. We got out, and we'll never hike the same way again. I've had my fair share of scares in the wild. Living close to Idaho's deep wilderness, you get used to being uncomfortable sometimes. You learn to deal with things like storms rolling in fast, temperatures dropping below freezing overnight, and wildlife encounters that make your blood run cold. Mountain lions, black bears, moose, hell, sometimes the people are the scariest part. You'd be surprised how strange someone can act when they know they're 50 miles from the nearest paved road and no one is coming if things go south. But there's one moment that stands out, one that's stuck in my head and lives there still, because it was the hardest my body has ever been hijacked by pure, raw adrenaline. And I'm not proud of it. Not because I did something stupid exactly, but because, despite everything I've learned and experienced, I let my mind get the better of me. It was late in the season, early October. The nights had started getting longer, colder. I was up around 9,000 feet, camped beside a little alpine lake ringed with jagged granite and talus. I don't need to name the place. It's not on most maps, and I prefer it that way. I'd had a bad day on the trail. One of those days where every little thing goes sideways. Started with a busted boot lace, then a twisted knee coming down a slick rock slab. Then the stove crapped out during breakfast and I had to chew on half-cooked oatmeal like it was punishment. The trail had vanished in a boulder field around noon, and I spent the better part of 3 hours bushwhacking up steep switchbacks that didn't exist, just trying to get where I'd planned to be. By the time I reached the lake, I was done. Not tired, drained. Muscles shaky, head pounding from the altitude, ready to collapse. But I still needed water, so I set up camp quickly and made the slow trudge down to the shoreline with just my Sawyer filter and a half-empty bottle. No moon that night. High clouds rolling in overhead, blotting out the stars. No light pollution either. Idaho has these massive dark sky reserves for a reason. When it's dark out there, it's dark. You can feel it, like the air itself gets heavier, soaked in shadow. My headlamp was weak, running low on battery, and all it really did was cut a small tunnel of vision out of the thick black around me. I crouched at the water's edge, icy water soaking into the knees of my base layer as I started filtering. My breath came in short little clouds in the beam of the headlamp. I wasn't thinking of anything in particular, just the rhythm of squeezing the filter bag, feeling the water level rise in the bottle, then squeezing again. Tired, like a machine running low on oil. That's when I caught the reflection. Just a single glint at first, like a tiny spark high up the wall of the basin. My headlamp flicked across it and something bounced the light back. And high up, I thought I imagined it, moved my headlamp back and saw it again. I stayed crouched there, suddenly stiff, eyes straining into the dark. That eye? It wasn't stationary. It was moving, not a slow sway like an animal bedded down, not the bobbing flicker of a branch catching the wind. This was steady, purposeful movement. Downhill. That part of the basin was damn near vertical. Steep talus fields that turned into full cliff in places, broken up with shelves of moss and scrub pine. You don't walk down that kind of slope unless you're used to it. And whatever was up there, it was coming straight down. I watched it for at least a minute or two. The eye would vanish behind rock outcrops, then show up again a few yards lower. It was getting closer, no doubt in my mind. I didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at that light, waiting. My brain went through the checklist of what it could be. It wasn't a person. You don't hike those cliffs at night. Not in that dark, not unroped, and not without a light. And it wasn't white, so not a goat. Not black either, so probably not a bear. There's sheep in that country, but I'd never seen them this high up, and definitely never a lone one descending a cliff like this. Everything about the way it moved screamed cat. A mountain lion. I've seen a few before, had encounters. They're scary, sure. They move like ghosts, vanish when you blink. But if you're careful and show them you're not prey, they usually keep their distance. This one was moving like it knew I was there, like it had me in its sights. I remember something a friend told me after he got attacked by one years ago. Said the lion followed him for miles, then suddenly closed the gap in a burst of speed and took him down. Nearly died. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks. He said it never made a sound until it hit him. This felt exactly like that. I was crouched, defenseless, no poles, no knife, no bear spray. Just me in my wool base layer, a nearly dead headlamp, and a filter bag. My inReach was back at the tent. My wife wouldn't check the tracker till late the next morning. Maybe noon. When she saw it hadn't moved, maybe she'd send out SAR. They'd follow the ping and find my tent. Then they'd follow the drag marks. Or maybe not. Lions like to hide their kills. I've been on a recovery before. Found what was left of a hiker after the wild animals had done their part. It's not something you forget. That smell. That soundless quiet when you come across human bones in the forest. The kind of silence that presses into your chest. I forced myself to move. Picked up a rock, heavy one with some edges. It was the only weapon I had. A rock. A caveman weapon, sure, but when that's what you have, you grab it and pray you won't need it. I scanned the cliff face again. The eye had vanished behind a boulder the size of a cabin. If it kept coming, it would reappear no more than 10 feet from me. I stepped back from the water, slowly, not wanting to trip or make noise. The lake surface didn't even ripple. I gripped that rock so hard my hand started to cramp. My heart was hammering. Couldn't hear anything but my own pulse in my ears. Not even the wind, not even the trees. Then she stepped out. In the dim spill of my dying headlamp, I saw the shape emerge from behind the rock. A body, legs, ears, not sleek like a lion, not crouched or coiled, but tall, narrow, almost awkward. I blinked. It was a mule deer, a goddamn muley doe. She froze the second she saw me. We stood there for several long seconds, 10 feet apart. Her eyes caught the light just right, glowing like lanterns in the dark. Big ears twitching. She sniffed once, took a half step forward, and tilted her head. Couldn't believe it. Every muscle in my body had been ready to fight for my life, and now I was standing toe-to-toe with a skinny, curious doe. She looked at me, then walked past, hooves clicking softly on the rocks, and lowered her head to drink from the lake not 5 yards away. I just stood there, stunned. The adrenaline had nowhere to go. My limbs started to shake. My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I realized I hadn't taken a full breath in minutes. My lungs were on fire. The doe lifted her head once, ears flicking back toward me. Then she bolted. One powerful leap and she was off into the dark, vanished between the rocks like smoke. No sound but the distant crunch of her hooves climbing back up the wall. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, listening, trying to remember who I was, what I was doing. My knees felt like jelly. My heart still wouldn't slow down. Eventually, I finished filtering water, though my hands were shaking so bad I spilled half of it. Walked slowly back to my tent, scanning every inch of the slope with my dying headlamp. No more reflections, no more movement, just me and the weight of my own mind playing tricks on me. I didn't sleep much that night, just lay in my bag listening to the breeze come and go, every creak of the trees outside sounding like footsteps. Every whisper of a branch sounded like breathing. I kept replaying the moment again and again in my head. The cliff, the eye, the movement, the certainty that I was about to die. And the doe, standing there like she owned the place, probably wondering what the hell I was doing down at her watering hole at that hour. It was funny later, days later, but that night it wasn't funny. It was the closest I've come to full-on panic in the backcountry. And the worst part was, it wasn't a cougar or a bear or a serial killer hiding in the rocks. It was a deer. Still, I don't brush it off, because that fear, that reaction, that was real. My body thought it was over. My brain had already made peace with the idea of being eaten in the dark, dragged into a ravine, maybe found in the spring by some unlucky ranger. I've trained myself not to overreact in the wild. I know what's out there. I've been around it my whole life. But in that moment, when your headlamp catches one single eye coming down the cliff in the middle of a dark sky wilderness, when you're exhausted and altitude drunk and alone, your brain stops caring about logic. It just wants to survive. That night taught me something I didn't expect. It reminded me how thin the line is between confidence and delusion. No matter how many times you've been out, no matter how much experience you have, the wild still has a way of reminding you that you are very, very small. That even the things you know can slip sideways in the dark. It was deep winter in New Hampshire. Not just cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and stays there, even after you're back home and warm again. We were going after one of the 4,000-footers. I honestly can't remember which one anymore. Might have been Carrigain or Galehead, one of those. But that part doesn't matter much. What mattered then was that I had the right gear, and I wasn't new to this. I'd done enough winter hikes in the whites to know what I was walking into. Layers, spikes, gloves, balaclava, everything packed down tight. I was with a friend, someone I'd done quite a few hikes with, experienced, solid in the woods, and not the type to take dumb risks. This wasn't one of those idiot goes up a mountain in cotton kind of situations. We were careful. We were ready. The day started cold and gray. The kind of gray where the sky blends into the trees until everything feels washed out. No sun, no blue, just this soft white glare that reflects off the snow and tires your eyes. We parked at the trailhead early, just before dawn, our breath visible in the headlights as we layered up and checked each other's packs. Everything was normal. Cold fingers, snow crunching under boots, zippers and buckles clicking into place. Familiar, comforting even. The first few miles were uneventful. We kept a steady pace, moving uphill with that quiet rhythm that comes with winter hiking. Just the sound of breathing and the crunch of snow underfoot. The woods were beautiful in that silent, frozen way. Trees bowed under snow weight, the trail barely visible under a fresh dusting. There's a certain stillness you only get in winter. Everything muffled, like the forest is holding its breath. We didn't talk much, just the occasional check-in or point at a view through the trees. The climb was steady, and the trail wound its way up through the hardwoods. At lower elevation, the snow was manageable, packed down by others who'd hiked the route before us. But as we got higher, the trees started to change. Thinner, shorter, more exposed. That's where things always get more interesting in winter. The wind picks up, the snow gets deeper, and ice starts showing up in places it doesn't belong. I remember we hit a long stretch of steeper trail, and it slowed us down. Not dangerous, just tiring. Post-holing a bit even with gaiters on, and it was cold enough that we had to keep moving or risk getting chilled. We stopped once, just long enough to take a few bites of frozen granola bars and drink some lukewarm tea from a thermos. Then we pushed on. We were maybe a mile from the summit when the trail shifted again. The terrain changed from snow-covered forest to exposed, rocky slopes. You see this all over the Whites. The higher you go, the more the trees thin out, and the more the trail turns into rock and ice. In the summer, this section would have been a scramble up large rock faces and ledges. In the winter, though, it was a whole different thing. I remember stepping out from a sheltered stretch of trail into an open area where the wind hit harder. Ahead of us was one of those classic icy sections that run across a slope. A large slab of ice, probably from snowmelt that had refrozen over the rocks. The trail crossed it at an angle right to left, cutting across the slope. It wasn't too wide, maybe 10 feet across, but steep enough and slick enough that you had to take it seriously. There was a small drop-off before the ice, like a step down from one level of trail to another. Not a big jump, but enough that it changed the way you entered the ice. I remember stopping and looking at it for a minute, thinking through the footing. It didn't look that bad. Micro spikes should have been enough. I crossed worse. I dropped down onto the ice. The second my feet hit, they went out from under me. It wasn't like a slow slip. There was no chance to correct or grab or shift my weight. It just happened. One moment I was upright, and the next I was sliding downhill on my back, then somehow flipped and landed on my ass. It was like the trail vanished beneath me. Just ice. Cold, hard, slick ice. I didn't scream. There wasn't time. My first thought was stupid. This isn't happening. But then it was happening, and I was going fast. My spikes weren't catching at all. My pack bounced and twisted behind me, throwing my balance off more, and the slope just kept dropping away. I was going feet first, which I guess was lucky. At least I could see where I was headed. What I saw next is burned into my memory. A drop. Not a mountain cliff kind of drop, but a solid 15 feet of nothing between the end of the ice sheet and the rocks below. Enough to mess up your legs. Enough to end the hike and possibly require a rescue. My mind went from frozen panic to white-hot clarity in a second. I tried to dig my hands in, twist, slow down. Nothing worked. I was sliding too fast. Then I saw them. 2 stunted trees sticking out from the slope, maybe 5 feet before the edge. Scraggly, bent, but solid. My body turned slightly, and my arms went out. I reached for them like a lifeline, and I grabbed them, one in each hand. My gloves barely held grip, but I locked my elbows and pulled myself to a stop between them. My legs were over the edge, not dangling, but close. Close enough that I felt the air, not the ground, under my heels. I didn't move. My heart was hammering so loud I could hear it over the wind. My body was frozen, not from cold, but from fear. Pure animal fear. I'd come that close to going over. I knew if those trees hadn't been there, or if I'd missed, I'd be at the bottom, probably with a broken leg or worse. I wasn't thinking about pain. I was thinking about how long it would have taken for someone to get help up here. Hours, maybe longer. I just stayed there, hanging on to those trees like my life depended on it. Because it kind of did. Eventually, I yelled back up, said I was okay, that I needed a minute. My buddy was up there watching the whole thing, and I could imagine how it must have looked from his perspective. Me disappearing over the edge, sliding toward that drop. But there was no panic in his voice, no shouts, just silence. Maybe he knew I had to work through it before I moved. The thing is, I wasn't out of danger yet. Getting to a stop didn't mean I was safe. The ice was still there. The slope was still steep. One wrong move and I could lose my grip and go over anyway. So I didn't move fast. I took my time. I breathed. I looked around and started to figure out how to climb back up without putting weight on the ice again. The snow to my left was deeper and softer, more packed with trees and roots. I shifted my weight toward it slowly, pulling myself sideways using branches and trunks. Every move was deliberate, no fast jerks, just careful shifts of weight. My crampons bit into some of the frozen moss and snow, and I started to crawl back up toward where the trail cut across. Took a while, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. but it felt like forever. Eventually, I pulled myself up above the ice line and stepped back onto solid trail. My legs were shaking. I don't remember saying anything. I don't think my buddy said much either. We just looked at each other, and I nodded. That was enough. We stood there for a bit, letting the adrenaline burn off. Then we moved on, slowly, carefully testing every step. We found a way around that ice patch by climbing through some thicker trees off to the side. Not ideal, but safer. And after that, we kept going. The summit wasn't far. The wind was worse up there, and we didn't linger. Just enough time to eat a little, drink some tea, snap a photo, and turn around. The climb down was quiet. The sun had started to burn through the clouds by then, casting long shadows over the trail, lighting up the ice in that eerie blue-white glow that makes everything look colder than it already is. On the way back, we passed the spot again. I looked down at the trees that had saved me. They were just there, like they'd always been. Bent and stunted and half buried in snow, nothing special. But they were the reason I walked out on my own 2 feet that day. I've done a lot of hikes since then, climbed bigger mountains, gone deeper into the backcountry. But that moment still comes back to me sometimes. The feel of ice under me, the drop, the way those trees stopped me cold. It didn't end in a rescue or a broken bone or anything dramatic. But it could have, easily. It reminded me that even when you do everything right, have the gear, the training, the experience, things can still go sideways in a heartbeat. The mountains don't care how prepared you are. They don't care who you are. They just are. Cold, silent, beautiful, and dangerous. That hike didn't stop me. If anything, it made me more careful, more aware. But I still go out there, still chase those summits in winter. I just pay more attention to the ice now, and I never take a step for granted. That moment, sliding toward the edge, grabbing those trees, sitting there frozen with my legs almost over the drop, that's carved into me. It wasn't the worst thing that could have happened, but it was close enough. And sometimes, close is all it takes to change how you move through the world. I made it off that mountain. I walked back to the car, drove home, and went on with life. But that stretch of trail, that patch of ice, those 2 crooked trees,